I'm hiding under the covers now after my cat Whale jumped on the bed. It's been years, but I swear I felt something else there. I am a 28-year-old man presently tucked under my blankets as if I were 6 years old. I am terrified and utterly confused while keeping my phone extremely close to my face. I'm out of solutions. How can this be occurring? I am uncertain what actions to take at this moment. I plan to copy and paste some information from my notes in the hope that afterward, someone can assist me and rescue me. Below is a recounting of incidents that transpired 6 years ago. I never disclosed what happened to anyone, even after documenting it all, but now I believe this is my final chance for redemption. I am a very light sleeper, and last night, I was roused by the shaking of my bed. It startled me momentarily until I noticed that my 13-pound black cat had jumped onto the bed. I live alone, and occasionally I forget that he shares my apartment with me, a freeloader, of course. After giving him a few strokes, I swiftly drifted back to sleep. My cat is a rescue. I adopted him a little over a year ago. He is a large black feline with striking yellow and orange eyes, resembling a classic Halloween cat. Shortly after his adoption, I took him to the veterinarian, who informed me that he was around 9 or 10 years old. He's not ancient but more akin to a middle-aged man in cat years and in good health, aside from carrying a bit of extra weight. "Are you ready for your meal, Lardo?" I asked as I propped myself up in bed. I didn't genuinely name him that. However, he hears Lardo, fat man, big guy, or gatto, more frequently than his actual name. I renamed him Whale after bringing him home, simply because that is what he is, a land whale. He did not respond to me with a meow. Instead, he trotted over to the kitchen in front of the cabinet where an endless supply of food seems to emerge every day. Whale isn't a particularly vocal cat. You see other cats meowing back to their owners in person or in movies, but he makes noise occasionally, usually a squeak. It resembles the sound of metal wheels on an old office chair desperately in need of lubrication. I mean this affectionately, of course. His meows are akin to someone who has lost their voice from being ill or shouting excessively, not silent, but rather a faint and sharp attempt at sound. I provided him with half a can of wet food, placing it in a cat bowl beside his bowl of dry food, which is accessible around the clock. He doesn't always finish his wet food, but today he seemed to have been anticipating it all night. Afterward, I prepared myself breakfast and reclined in bed, waiting for the time to depart. Whale jumped up on the bed, looking as though he wanted attention. I patted my chest, calling him over. He came and settled on my chest, purring loudly. He looked at me for a moment before flopping over. He's certainly not a graceful cat. Most felines would lay down gently, but he finds his spot, goes limp, and allows gravity to take over. I generally have to position an arm against him to prevent him from sliding off. He sprawled himself across me, and a few minutes later, I finished my meal and set out for class. Currently, I am a first-year college student in the second semester, with the fall semester having commenced just last week. Over the summer, I managed to relocate into my first apartment. It is petite but sufficient for me and a cat. It's situated in a moderate-sized building with 16 total apartments. I reside on the 3rd floor, the top level, with one neighbor beside me and 2 additional apartments across the hallway. The layout is identical on each floor, and there is also a subfloor with apartments. To provide a brief description of my apartment when you walk in the front door, you essentially get 75% of the tour. Since my apartment is compact, I placed my bed in the living room next to the front door because it was too large to fit comfortably in the actual bedroom. At the foot of the bed is half of an L-shaped sectional sofa facing the wall-mounted TV. There are large windows to the right of my bed and couch that open sideways and outward like a door. They are smeared with paint and lack screens, a true landlord special. I completed my classes for the day and returned home in the evening to find Whale lying on the same couch cushion he occupied when I left. He was spread out like a crime scene. I had never seen him loaf, as many cats do, tucking in all their legs while lying on their stomachs. He raised his head and let out a significant yawn, revealing his numerous chipped teeth. He used to be a street cat before ending up at the shelter, so he bears a few scars, chipped teeth, and torn ears from battling other cats. Despite his battle-worn appearance, he has never displayed an ounce of aggression. He remains calm and even content during his veterinary appointments, purring throughout. In fact, he often purrs simply while sitting next to me. He appears satisfied just to be indoors, with a continuous supply of food and attention. After setting my school items down, I readied myself to go bowling with some friends. It was mostly heavy drinking with a side of bowling. A few hours later, I was completely intoxicated and called an Uber to take me home. Clambering up all 3 flights of stairs took me about 15 minutes, during which I stumbled a few times. I finally reached my apartment and stumbled in. While drunkenly preparing for bed, I set a couple of alarms to remind me of some online auctions for trading card game cards that I didn't want to miss. Tomorrow was Saturday. I mumbled to myself, "Thank goodness I don't have to wake up early." I made the desperate crawl into bed and felt Whale land on the mattress with considerable force. He came and settled next to me, and I quickly drifted off to slumber. I awoke to an alarm and quickly rolled over, still dazed, reaching for my phone on the nightstand to turn it off. It was an alarm I must have set the night before for an auction, but I couldn't recall which one, and honestly, it didn't matter because my head felt like a cracked coconut. As I rolled back over, I noticed something unusual. My front door was ajar. Again, having my bed in the living room affords me more space, but it also means I slept mere feet from the only entrance to my apartment, which was wide open. What in the world? I queried sleepily as I got out of bed. I approached to shut the door and noticed the deadbolt sticking out from the side of the door. It quickly dawned on me that in my drunken stupor the previous night, I had perhaps failed to properly close my door before engaging the deadbolt. I secured the door this time and then scanned my apartment for Whale. I assumed he might be exploring the apartments and had accidentally pushed the door open, but it wouldn't hurt to check first. I looked in his usual nooks and crannies under the bed, in the cupboard beneath the bathroom sink, and in what was meant to be the bedroom but had become more of a workspace for my computer and studies. No luck. I exited my apartment and began searching the hallway. He wasn't on my floor. I wasn't overly concerned since the building featured a main door for entering and exiting, so he had to still be within the premises. I checked the second floor and still couldn't find him. The building has a pet policy prohibiting any animals, but nearly everyone ignores that rule since the landlord seldom visits. Nevertheless, I was hopeful no one had spotted my cat wandering through the building. Rounding to the first floor, there he was, sitting, staring at the main entrance. "Whale," I quietly called as I approached. He didn't seem to notice me, still fixated on the outside. I don't think he even realized I was there until I picked him up. He began purring as I carried him back to the apartment. It was as if I were holding a revving motorcycle. After placing him on the bed, I turned to close the door. Just as I shut it, I thought I saw a face, a bodiless visage at approximately eye level. I wasn't even certain I had truly seen anything, merely a flash of something round across the hallway from my door. I could only compare it to the little shapes you might perceive in your vision after briefly looking away from a bright light. I dismissed it as some light reflection from the hallway window and closed the door. A few more days passed, and they weren't particularly noteworthy, merely a blend of classes, work, and study sessions. Tonight, I intended to do more of the same study on my computer. After a few hours of examining the social and economic conditions of America in the 1800s, I found myself resisting the urge to headbutt a pencil. I decided to call it a night. I powered down my computer, watching the screen transition from blue to black. The moment it turned black, I caught sight of another face, only for an instant, not even long enough to fully comprehend. I know I saw it, however. It was right there. Actually, it wasn't. It looked more like a reflection hovering just above my right shoulder from where I sat. I whirled around quickly enough to give myself whiplash. Nothing. Am I hallucinating? I had no idea how to respond. What was that? Befuddled, I ventured into the living area, turned on the television, and sank into the couch. I attempted to distract myself from the earlier incident when I noticed Whale. He was standing on a couch cushion with his hind legs, his front paws resting against the windowsill. He frequently does this, maybe patrolling the area. "Keeping the neighborhood secure, big guy?" I remarked to him. His fur bristled as he emitted a low growl. It startled me initially because I had never seen him behave this way. His ears flattened against his head, looking as flat as a board. He continued to let out this low, menacing groan. I stood up to peer out the window, glancing down to where he was staring. I saw nothing. I closed the blinds, and he ceased his growling. He jumped off the couch and onto the bed. After spending roughly an hour watching YouTube, I slipped into bed. Whale was already asleep at the foot of my bed, softly snoring as he did. I nestled next to him and drifted off to sleep. In the morning, I awoke to yet another unusual sight. "There's no way," I murmured aloud. I shot up in bed. The door was ajar. I knew with absolute certainty that I had securely closed it the previous evening. I had no alcohol in my system the night before to rationalize this occurrence. I did not leave my door open. I ascended from the bed, already aware I would once again have to track down my cat. He wasn't on any of the first 3 floors, so I descended another flight of stairs to the subfloor. He was not there either. I picked up a scratching sound from a door on a higher level. Returning to the main area, there he was, scratching at the main door from the other side. He must have slipped out while someone else exited the building. The cold air outside made me feel terrible that he had been stranded out there. I opened the door and scooped him up. He wasn't cold, so at least he hadn't been outside too long. I returned him to the apartment and prepared for classes. After class, Sarah accompanied me home. Sarah was a girl from my chemistry class with whom I had been chatting for a little while over the summer. She had visited a few times before and had met Whale. He seldom acknowledged her, but he seemed fine with her. Today, Whale approached her and brushed against her leg in greeting. "Missed me, huh?" she remarked. "He's merely hoping you'll provide him with food," I joked. Sarah and I hadn't officially labeled ourselves as a couple, but we genuinely enjoyed spending time together. We ordered some food and began watching a movie. We reached about 10 minutes into the film when she placed her hand on my thigh and asked, "Do you want to, Smooth," I replied teasingly. She scoffed, and Sarah leaned in to kiss me as the movie faded into the background. While we were making out, I swear I briefly saw another face. I paused. It didn't appear identical to the previous faces I had glimpsed. It looked like a woman's face, I think, and it was also closer than the others. It had been just behind Sarah's head, almost peeking at me through her hair. As usual, upon my realization, it vanished. I couldn't discern any specific features. "Hey, are you all right?" Sarah asked, concerned. "Why, yeah, I'm fine. I just think I got something in my eye." I didn't want to spoil the mood over something I wasn't even sure I had truly seen. As we continued to kiss, I occasionally glanced down toward the couch and noticed Whale perched on the backrest with his ears flat, remaining completely silent. I thought he was watching us, but appeared to be focused on me. I tried not to let it bother me as I made a conscious effort to focus on the task at hand instead of the unusually judgmental cat. Once we finished, we wrapped up the movie, and then Sarah had to leave. I wished she could have stayed the night, but I understood she had early classes in the morning. I was alone once more. When I moved into this apartment, I cherished the ambient noise of the city and the commotion from my neighbors. While some might find it bothersome, and at times my neighbors could be irritating, the sounds made me feel less isolated. Now, however, I felt alone again, suddenly more conscious of my surroundings and the shadowed corners of my apartment. Before heading to bed, I placed a box of unpacked books in front of the door. I refused to chase after my cat again because my door swings open whenever it pleases. Perhaps I began sleepwalking. I'd never experienced that before, but how would I know now that I live alone? I climbed into bed and fell asleep. Around 2:00 a.m., I awoke with an uncomfortable, warm feeling in my stomach. I knew what this implied. The Taco Bell I had ordered earlier was returning to haunt me. I trudged sleepily toward the bathroom. I was relieved Sarah wasn't here to hear the gastrointestinal wars I was undergoing. While punishing the porcelain, I heard an aggressive scratching at the bathroom door. It startled me. Usually, Whale scratches the door now and then when I have it closed, but this sounded different, as if he was angry with me for some reason. He scratched again. I don't know why, but I felt a twinge of fear. I was in quite a vulnerable position to be dealing with anything. Another few scratches on the door. The scratching did not cease. He clawed so aggressively that the door rattled in its frame. I tried to remain silent. The volume reached such a point that I worried my neighbor might come knocking. I finished my business as quickly as I could and flung open the bathroom door. As I twisted the doorknob, the scratching ceased. I looked down and saw Whale wasn't there. I examined the exterior of the door and found no scratch marks. Did I imagine the entire ordeal? After settling myself mentally, I returned to my bed. Whale was curled up at the foot of the bed, asleep. Is this what food poisoning feels like? I pondered in my mind. Exhausted and baffled, I fell back asleep. I woke again later, gasping for air. I opened my eyes and everything was black. I felt fur in my face and mouth. My fat cat was suffocating me. I attempted to shift him, but he wouldn't budge. 13 pounds now felt like 13 tons. I continued staring into darkness as my chest felt increasingly heavier from the lack of oxygen. The darkness was suddenly interrupted by 2 orange and yellow orbs staring back at me, no piercing through me. "Get off of me!" I managed to bark as I rolled him off my face, light flooding my vision. It was early morning, and the daylight filtering through the window stung my eyes. I sat up quickly against my headboard and squinted at him as my eyes adjusted to the brightness. I was furious and terrified. Whale didn't return my gaze and jumped off the bed. Did he mean to do that? I mused. Nothing like this had ever happened before. When I went to feed him before leaving for class, I examined him closely. Maybe I had taken a stray cat off the street trying to enter our building. He patiently sat at my feet, waiting for me to scoop his wet food into his bowl. He remained as still as a statue while I inspected his ears. There were little cuts on them. I then checked his teeth. Gently placing my finger against his mouth, I raised his upper lip. He seemed entirely unfazed by my probing and maintained eye contact, which was unsettling. Yes, pieces of his teeth were indeed missing. It was him. I placed his food down, and for a brief moment, he remained still, continuing to stare at me. This moment felt notably longer than what seemed natural for him, which struck me as odd. I was about to leave for class when I noticed that I couldn't see my doorknob. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered aloud. I was beginning to develop a migraine. Knowing I had to skip class, I called out of work before it worsened. I used to get these migraines much more often in high school, sometimes a few times a month, but now I only experience maybe 2 in a year, and they are debilitating. It usually starts with a disturbance in my vision. For instance, if I hold my hand out before my face, a couple of my fingers seem to be missing. They're there, of course, but in their place is a swirling, distracting distortion, even if I close my eyes. This is followed by numbness in my mouth, tongue, and occasionally one of my hands, alongside unbearable neck pain and impending nausea. They typically won't subside until I vomit several times. It's as if my brain is rebooting itself. During this time, every one of my senses feels like an assault on my senses. Nothing tastes good, feels good, smells good, and any bright light feels like it's frying my brain. Sometimes I get fortunate, and they last only 30 minutes, but I have endured them for as long as 8 hours. It had been a while since my last one, so I figured I was in for a lengthy battle. I sent Sarah a text notifying her that I wouldn't be attending chemistry that day. It took a while since I couldn't look straight at my keyboard. I had to use my peripheral vision to type out the correct letters. It takes forever to manage any typing under these circumstances. I poured myself a glass of water, curled up on the couch, and tried to drift off before the worst set in. Meow, meow. I heard 2 distinct cat meows just a few moments later. I detested even hearing it. Meow. Sitting up amidst my agony, I glanced around for Whale. I spotted his tail flicking from the bed, though I couldn't see the rest of him due to my migraine. He was indeed there. A further meow echoed from behind me. Meow, meow, meow. More articulate meows, seemingly originating from my PC room. Fed up with the noise, I decided to rise and investigate. My vision was undoubtedly deteriorating, making my efforts more complicated, exacerbated by all the other symptoms now in full swing. Light streamed into my PC room through the window. I had to squint to avoid damaging my retinas. I heard another piercing meow that sounded like it was directly in front of me, yet as far as I could tell, nothing was there. I lingered for a few minutes, waiting to hear it again, but it remained absent. At this point, my mouth was starting to salivate. I knew the inevitable rush to the toilet was imminent. Turning to exit the PC room and head to the bathroom, I suddenly froze. My ill-timed stop almost caused me to vomit, but vomiting was the last thing on my mind. In the doorway before me, I spotted another face approximately 2 feet away. This time, however, it did not vanish. Up until now, these faces had appeared and faded away quicker than I could blink. I couldn't completely see it, as the swirling distortion obstructed my vision, but I made out some semblance of its shaped cheekbones, a jawline, and hair at the periphery of my visual disruption. From what I could gather, it had dark, short hair, pale skin, and a fairly bony structure. I dared to look away slightly to try and catch it in my peripheral vision. It possessed eyes that appeared larger than what would typically be expected of a person. Not balloon-sized, but instead closer to golf balls. I couldn't ascertain their color, but they were definitely dark. It had the face of a man wearing a sorrowful expression, frowning as if it had witnessed the saddest event of its existence. Then, it started edging closer, bobbing up and down as if the rest of its body were present, and I simply couldn't see it. Not a sound accompanied its movements. Fear would have been a welcome emotion at that moment compared to what I felt. Fear was part of it, but also pain, nausea, frustration, and desperation. I wanted to retreat into a corner and cower. I wanted to cry, to vomit, to shout at it. I was utterly fed up with this entire experience. I thought in my mind, if I have to endure this, I might as well commit. I swung my fist at it. Pain surged through my arm like an electric shock. I struck the doorframe instead. At least it didn't feel broken, but the face had vanished. My stomach decided that was enough activity, and my mouth filled with saliva once more. I made a frenzied dash toward the bathroom, a more pitiful stumble, colliding with the walls I could barely see. I burst into the bathroom, slammed the door shut behind me, and locked it. As I twisted the doorknob, the scratching halted. I glanced at the ground before me, and to my horror, Whale was not there. I checked the outer side of the door, no scratch marks. Did I imagine the entirety of it? Once I calmed myself, I returned to my bed. Whale lay asleep at the foot of the bed. Is this what food poisoning feels like? I wondered within myself. Exhausted and perplexed, I fell back asleep. I woke again later, gasping for air. I opened my eyes to complete blackness. I felt fur pressing against my face and in my mouth. My hefty cat was suffocating me. I tried to shove him off, but he simply wouldn't move. 13 pounds felt like 13 tons at that moment. I kept staring into darkness as my chest became heavier from the lack of oxygen. All at once, the darkness dissipated, revealing 2 orange and yellow orbs staring back at me, looking through me. "Get off of me!" I managed to shout, finally managing to roll him off my face as light flooded my vision. It was early morning. The light filtering through the window stung my eyes. I sat up abruptly against my headboard, squinting at him while my eyes adjusted to the bright light. I was angered and terrified. He didn't return my gaze and hopped off the bed. Did he mean to do that? I wondered. Nothing like this had ever occurred before. When I went to feed him before leaving for class, I examined his appearance more closely. Perhaps I had picked up a stray cat off the street that had wandered into our building. He sat patiently at my feet, waiting for me to scoop wet food into his bowl. He remained perfectly still while I inspected his ears. I found little cuts on them. I proceeded to check his teeth. I gently placed my finger against his mouth and lifted his upper lip. He didn't seem bothered by my inspection, but maintained eye contact, which was unsettling. Yes, portions of his teeth were indeed absent. It was undeniably him. I put down his food, and for a moment longer than usual, he didn't move and just continued looking at me. I was on the verge of leaving for class when I noticed I couldn't find my doorknob. "You can't be serious," I muttered aloud. I felt the start of a migraine. Knowing I'd have to skip classes, I contacted work beforehand, attempting to avert any possible complications from worsening. I used to suffer from these migraines more frequently in high school, and now I might have 1 or 2 annually, but they are absolutely debilitating. They typically commence with disturbances in my vision. If I hold my hand out in front of my face, a couple of fingers might appear to be missing. They're still there, obviously, but the situation is obscured by a swirling distortion that persists even when I close my eyes. This evolves into tingling in my mouth, tongue, and sometimes one hand. The back of my neck aches unbearably before the nausea quickly sets in. They generally last until I vomit several times, as if my brain is resetting itself. During every episode, all my senses feel like agonies. Everything tastes, feels, and smells wrong, and bright lights feel like they are melting my mind. Sometimes I'm fortunate, and they only last around 30 minutes, but I've endured them for as long as 8 hours. Since it had been a while since the last one, I assumed this would be an extended session. I sent Sarah a text to let her know I wouldn't be attending chemistry today, which drained me since I could hardly focus on my keyboard. I had to use peripheral vision to correctly type out the letters, and typing in that state takes an eternity. I filled a glass with water, curled up on the couch, and attempted to fall asleep before the worst of it set in. Meow, meow. I heard two distinct cat meows moments later. I despised even the sound. Meow. I sat up agonizingly and looked for Whale. I noticed his tail flicking from the bed. I couldn't see the rest of him due to my migraine, but he was certainly there. I heard another meow. This time it was far behind me. Meow, meow, meow. More distinct meows seemed to emanate from my computer room. I was so fed up with the sound that I resolved to get up and investigate. My vision was undoubtedly deteriorating, and all the other symptoms were now escalating. Light seeped into my computer room through the window, and I had to squint to avoid damaging my sight. I heard another dreadful meow, seemingly right in front of me, but as far as I could tell, nothing was there. I stood for a few moments, anticipating it would repeat, but it did not. By this point, my mouth filled with excess saliva. I could sense the inevitable need to rush to the bathroom. I turned to leave my computer room and head to the restroom when I abruptly stopped. My sudden halt almost pushed me to vomit, but my bewildered mind was now focused on something else. In the doorway stood another face, merely a couple of feet from me, but unlike before, this face did not vanish. Previously, these faces had appeared and disappeared before I could blink. I couldn't fully comprehend its form. The distortion that clouded my vision swirled violently, but I could make out a figure of cheekbones, a jawline, and hair just at the periphery of my impaired vision. By its appearance, it had dark, short hair and pale skin, maintaining a bony structure. I looked away a little to try to glimpse it in my peripheral vision. Large eyes stared back that appeared too big for a human, a quality I found unsettling. They were not balloon-sized, but closer to that of golf balls. I attempted to see their color but could not discern them. The face exuded a melancholic expression. Then, it began moving closer, bobbing slightly as if what remained of its body was just not visible. All sound evaporated. Fear would have been welcome in that moment compared to the metaphorical punch in the gut I felt. I was overwhelmed by panic, nausea, frustration, and the need to escape. I wanted to cower in a corner, to cry, to vomit, to scream at it. I was fed up entirely with this experience. In my mind, I thought, if I'm to suffer, then I don't want just a nibble. I swung my fist at it, feeling pain shoot up through my arm like bolts of electricity. I had inadvertently hit the door frame. It didn't seem broken, but the figure had faded away. My stomach registered dissatisfaction with the movement, and my mouth filled with saliva. I rushed toward the bathroom, hoping to alleviate what was clearly on the horizon. I crashed into it, slamming the door behind me and locked it. As I turned the doorknob, the scratching ceased. I looked down before me, yet I found Whale wasn't there. I checked the outer side of the door, no scratch marks. Did I imagine the whole ordeal? Deciding to settle myself mentally, I climbed back into bed. Whale lay at the foot, asleep. Is this what food poisoning feels like? I thought. Exhausted and confused, I returned to sleep. I jolted awake again, choking for air. I opened my eyes and all I could see was black. I felt fur pressing against my face and lips. My hefty cat was suffocating me. I struggled to shove him away, but he refused to yield. 13 pounds felt as though it were 13 tons. I continued to gaze into the darkness while feeling my chest become heavier and heavier from lack of oxygen. Suddenly, the darkness was pierced by 2 orange and yellow orbs staring back at me, no looking into my soul. "Get the hell off of me," I yelled, managing to push him off my face just as light flooded back into my vision. It was early morning. The light streaming from the window stung my eyes. I sat up quickly against the headboard and squinted at him as my vision adjusted to the light. I was enraged and terrified. He didn't meet my gaze. He hopped off the bed. Did he mean to do that? I thought. Nothing like this had ever occurred before. As I prepared to feed him before heading off to classes, I examined him carefully. Perhaps I had unwittingly acquired a random cat from the streets. He patiently waited at my feet for me to present him with his wet food. He remained perfectly still while I inspected his ears. I noticed cuts. There were indeed small cuts. Next, I checked his teeth. I placed my finger gently against his mouth and raised his upper lip. He didn't appear bothered by my examination and maintained unwavering eye contact with me, and that felt strange. Yes, pieces of his teeth were definitely missing. It was him. I put his food in front of him to eat, but for a second, he didn't move and just kept gazing at me. This lingered just briefly longer than what felt normal for him, but it was noticeable. As I prepared to leave for classes, I realized I could not see my doorknob. "You can't be serious," I exclaimed aloud. I could feel the migraine beginning to rise. I knew that I would need to miss classes, and I called off work before it worsened. I used to get these migraines much more frequently during high school, usually a few times monthly. However, more recently, I encountered them only about 2 times in a year. These migraines are debilitating. They typically begin with a lapse in vision. For example, when I hold my hand out in front of my face, a couple of fingers will seem to be missing. They're still there, of course, but in their place, all I perceive is a swirling, distracting void no matter whether my eyes are open or closed. This is followed by numbness in my mouth, tongue, and sometimes just one of my hands. The back of my neck is killing me, and soon nausea sets in. They don't stop until I finally vomit a few times. It's sort of like my brain is resetting itself. During this period, every one of my senses feels as if it's attacking me. Everything tastes, feels, and smells disgusting, and any bright light feels like it's liquefying my mind. On rare occasions, I come away with a bit of fortune, and they only last about 30 minutes, but I've had them hang around for about 8 hours. It had been a long while since my last one, so I assumed I was in it for the extended version this time. I texted Sarah to let her know I wouldn't be in chemistry today, which took forever because I couldn't look directly at my keyboard. I had to use my peripheral vision just to type the correct letters. Typing anything takes an age in this condition. I grabbed a glass of water, curled up on the couch, and attempted to settle in before I finally passed out. Meow, meow, a pair of perfect cat meows cut through my misery. Just hearing it made me frustrated. Meow, my head shot up despite the pain as I searched for Whale. I noticed his tail flicking back and forth from the bed. I could barely make out his body through the pain, but he was certainly there. Another meow echoed, this time coming from behind me. Meow, meow, meow. The incessant meows emanated from the direction of my computer room. Overwhelmed by noise, I decided to rise and investigate. My vision steadily worsened, making my efforts increasingly complicated. The light shining into my computer room from the window forced me to squint to avoid damage. I heard more meows. They sounded like they were directly in front of me, but I couldn't see anything there. I briefly stood by the door anticipating the sound once more, but it never returned. At that moment, my mouth filled with an overabundance of saliva. I knew I had to make a swift trip to the porcelain throne. I turned to exit the computer room when I suddenly halted. My abrupt stop nearly overwhelmed me. I actually lost track of my thoughts, but the moment wasn't even about my bowels anymore. Standing in the doorway, there appeared another face just 2 feet away from me, but this time, it didn't disappear. Until now, every face I had experienced had always vanished before I could blink. I struggled to comprehend it. The distortion swirling in my vision was maddening, but I could make out some features: cheekbones, a jawline, and a shadow of hair at the edges of my limited visual space. The figure possessed dark, short hair, pale skin, and an emaciated frame. I ventured to glance slightly away from it, hoping to perceive it with my peripheral vision. What I witnessed were eyes too large for a human to the point they appeared disconcertingly oversized. Not balloon-like, more closely resembling golf balls. I could not discern their color, but they clearly appeared dark. Their expression was sorrowful, resembling a frown. Without warning, it began inching closer, its body bobbing just beyond my view. There was no noise from its movement. Fear would have been a welcome feeling in that moment compared to everything I was experiencing. I was overwhelmed by panic, nausea, frustration, and despair. Deep within, I longed for a corner to cower in. I wanted to scream or cry or maybe vomit. I was just sick playing a part in all of this. I felt desperate. To overstate it, my mind thought, if I am to suffer, I'll do it on my own terms. I swung my arm. Pain surged through my wrist like a jolt of electricity from hitting the door frame. At least it hadn't broken, but the face had vanished, just as I would have predicted. My stomach was not satisfied, and I filled with saliva. I dashed for the bathroom, more stumbling than running. I slammed the door behind me and secured the lock. As I twisted the knob to the bathroom door, the scratching abruptly stopped. I peered down and found Whale wasn't there. I checked the exterior of the door. There were no scratch marks. Did I imagine the entire exchange? After collecting my thoughts, I returned to the bedroom. Whale lay at the foot of the bed, fast asleep. Is this food poisoning? I wondered internally. Exhausted and bewildered, I returned to slumber. Once more, I was jolted awake, gasping for air. Upon opening my eyes, I was met by total darkness. Fur pressed against my face and mouth, I was suffocating under my ample cat. I attempted to shove him aside, yet he would not budge. The 13 pounds seemed to have morphed into 13 tons. I continued to stare into the pitch-black void, while my chest grew heavier from the oppressive lack of oxygen. The darkness was disrupted by the appearance of 2 orange-yellow orbs staring back at me, piercing through me. "Get the hell off of me!" I finally shouted, managing to push him away from my face as light flooded my vision. Early morning offered harsh sunlight streaming through the window. I shot up against the headboard as quickly as I could, squinting at him while my eyes adjusted to the brightness. I was furious and terrified. Whale didn't meet my gaze and hopped off the bed. Did he mean to do that? I considered. Nothing like this had ever occurred before. While preparing to feed him before departing for classes, I examined Whale closely. Maybe I inadvertently rescued a stray cat from the street attempting to enter our building. He was settled at my feet, waiting patiently for me to scoop his wet food into the bowl. He was as still as a statue as I inspected his ears for any damage. There were indeed cuts. The little slices proved to be there. Next, I checked his teeth. Applying gentle pressure, I raised his upper lip. He didn't seem bothered by my probing, keeping eye contact with me, which made me uneasy. Yes, there were pieces of his teeth missing. It definitely was him. I set down his food, and for a split second, he sat motionless, merely observing me. This moment felt distinctly longer than what I would consider natural. As I was preparing to leave for class, I noticed I couldn't see my doorknob. "You've got to be kidding me," I voiced aloud in disbelief. I felt the migraine beginning to throb. Realizing I would need to miss classes, I called off work before it escalated. In high school, I suffered from these migraines quite often. It used to be weekly, but now, I'd be lucky to endure them few and far between. Each experience is agonizing. They typically commence with a disturbance in my vision. For instance, if I held out my hand in front of me, a couple of fingers would appear to be absent. They were still there, obviously, but all I'd see was a swirling, distracting void, persisting even with closed eyes. This is often soon followed by numbness spreading in my mouth, tongue, or one of my hands. An unbearable ache developed at the back of my neck, quickly afflicted by nausea. They usually don't dissipate until I manage to vomit a few times, almost like my brain needs a reset. During these episodes, every one of my senses feels like a personal affront. Nothing tastes good, feels good, or smells good. Bright lights burn like acid on my mind. There are times when I escape this hell sooner and get away with just a 30-minute attack, but I've suffered through 5-hour attacks before. I had been fortunate enough to avoid them for a time, but now, I encountered the start of a new series. I sent Sarah a text letting her know I wouldn't make it to chemistry today, which took forever because I couldn't look directly at my keyboard. I had to use my peripheral vision, which cost me so much time to type the proper letters. Every keystroke was a nightmare. I poured myself a glass of water, nestling back into the couch, and attempted to keep calm until I fell asleep. Meow, meow. A pair of perfect cat meows drifted through the air, and I loathed even hearing their sound. Meow. I quickly propped myself up despite my discomfort and searched for Whale. I could see his tail flicking near the edge of the bed. He was surely there. Another meow emanated from behind me. Meow, meow, meow. More meows appeared to come from my PC room. I was intensely fed up with the noise at this point and decided to rise and investigate the source of the sound. My vision continued to worsen, with the other symptoms now threatening to amplify. As I entered my PC room, I had to squint while blocking out the bright sunlight pouring through the window. I took a moment to listen for another meow, ready to respond. Shockingly, I heard it radiating from what seemed directly in front of me, but as I glanced toward the noise, nothing was there. I lingered. Silence reigned, trailing after just a moment of anticipation. At this point, my mouth was filled with saliva again. I sensed the inevitable encounter with the porcelain throne approaching. I turned to exit the PC room and head to the bathroom when I suddenly paused. My abrupt stop nearly caused me to rupture something, but it was too late to even consider my state. All I could imagine now was that in the doorway, I saw another face about 2 feet away from me, but this time, that face chose not to vanish. Up until this moment, all the faces I had encountered would appear and vanish before I could even blink. I couldn't fully see it, as the swirling distortion in my vision seemed intent on blinding me, but I identified the formed cheekbones, a jawline, and a tuft of hair just barely visible in my peripheral sight. The being had dark, short hair, pale skin, and a bony structure. I craned my head slightly to attempt getting it into my peripheral vision. Its eyes were undeniably enormous, larger than a normal person's. They appeared almost bulbous, but not quite. I couldn't discern the color, but they were indeed dark. It had a man's face adorned with a sorrowful expression, frowning as though it had just borne witness to the most tragic event in its existence. Then, it started drifting closer, bobbing abysmal as though its body was there, yet I just couldn't perceive it. No sound came from its motion. Fear would have been a fortunate emotion in that moment compared to everything else I was enduring. I felt a blend of pain, nausea, disappointment, and despair. I wanted to retreat into a corner, to weep, to vomit, to scream at the vision of a being I stood before. I was falling apart mentally. To compel a recursive thought, my mind echoed, "If I must endure this, I'll do it my way." I swung my fist toward it. Pain shot up through my arm like lightning striking. I connected with the doorframe instead. Yet the face was gone as expected. My stomach whispered discontent once more, and saliva filled my mouth. I careened toward the bathroom, more of a pitiful lurch, and hit the walls as I stumbled my way toward the restroom. I surged into the bathroom, slammed the door behind me, and secured the lock. I flicked the door handle, and the scratching halted. Turning to glance down, I was met with emptiness where my cat should have been. I scrutinized the corridor outside and discovered no scratch marks. Had I imagined the entire horror? Once I managed to gather my thoughts, I returned to bed. Whale was stretched out asleep at its foot. Is this what food poisoning is? I wondered internally. Completely depleted and confused, I surrendered to sleep once more. I awoke again, struggling to breathe. I opened my eyes to complete darkness. I felt fur invading my face and mouth. My hefty cat was smothering me. I attempted to shove him away, yet he remained immobile. 13 pounds felt like 100. I kept staring into darkness as my chest felt heavier from the absence of air. Suddenly, the darkness was shattered by the appearance of two glowing orbs staring back at me, boring through me. "Get off my face!" I managed to yell at last, finally rolling him away as the light flooded my vision. Morning had emerged, and the rays altering their trajectory through the windows hurt my eyes. I leapt up in bed, quickly pushing myself against the headboard. I squinted, taking in Whale as he leapt off the bed. Did he intend that? I mused. Nothing like this had ever taken place previously. While preparing to feed him before heading to classes, I scrutinized him further. Perhaps I had unknowingly rescued a random cat from the streets. He sat patiently at my feet, awaiting me while I scooped his wet food into his bowl. He remained like a statue while I inspected his ears. There were small cuts indeed. Next, I checked his teeth. I gingerly poked at his mouth with my finger and raised his lip. He seemed unfazed by my poking and sustained eye contact with me, which felt unnerving. Yes, there were pieces of his teeth missing. It definitively was him. I set his food down in front of him. For a brief moment, he didn't move and only gazed at me. This felt like a noticeably longer time than usual for him, which caught my attention. As I was about to leave for class, I realized I could not locate my doorknob. "You've got to be joking," I said incredulously. I felt a migraine stirring. Realizing I would need to skip classes, I called ahead and contacted work before things deteriorated further. I used to suffer from these migraines frequently in high school, occasionally experiencing them several times a month. More recently, I would only get maybe 2 in a year, but these several episodes have been debilitating. They typically commence with disturbances in my vision. For instance, if I hold my hand out in front of my face, I may notice a couple of fingers appear to be absent. They remain there physically, but all I can see is a swirling, disorienting blur that persists even with my eyes closed. This is usually followed by numbness in my mouth, tongue, and sometimes one of my hands. The back of my head begins to ache terribly, and soon after, nausea sets in. They typically do not end until I manage to vomit a few times so that it's like my brain resets itself. My senses become completely overwhelmed by everything. Nothing tastes, feels, or smells right. Bright lights burn like acid on my brain. Sometimes I get lucky, and they last about 30 minutes, but I've endured migraines lasting 8 hours before. Given that it had been some time since my last attack, I assumed I would be in for the long haul. I sent Sarah a message letting her know I wouldn't attend chemistry today, which took quite some time due to my inability to focus on my keyboard directly. I had to rely on my peripheral vision to type the correct letters. Getting anything typed took forever in that state. I poured myself a glass of water, curled up on the couch, and tried to doze off before the worst of it set in. Meow, meow. I heard 2 distinctly perfect cat meows just moments later. I despised even the sound. Meow. I quickly sat up amidst agony and scanned for Whale. I could spot his tail flicking on the bed. I couldn't see more than that due to my migraine, but he was there. Another meow echoed, once again distant. Meow, meow, meow. More perfect meows sounded from the direction of my PC room. I was utterly fed up with the noise now, prompting me to stand and investigate. The deterioration of my vision had left me reeling, and my other symptoms were steadily intensifying. There was light filtering into my PC room through the window, forcing me to squint to avoid blinding myself. I captured yet another meow. This one sounded so close it drew my attention, but when I glanced toward the sound, nothing was present. I lingered for a moment, waiting for it to repeat, but it remained silent. By this point, my mouth brimmed with saliva. I sensed that the need to rush to the restroom was quickly approaching. I turned to leave my study room when I stopped dead in my tracks. My abrupt halt almost made me regurgitate, but I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing only on the fact that I observed another face about 2 feet away. And this time, it didn't simply disappear. Previous encounters had always faded before my very eyes. Now, I felt I was freezing time. I struggled to fully ascertain the figure, as the swirling blockage hurried around like a vortex of confusion. Nonetheless, I could apprehend some of its distinct attributes: pronounced cheekbones, a stringent jawline all laced with hair at the scant edge of my fissured sight. It had dark, short hair, a pale complexion, and an exceedingly thin form. I dared to look away slightly to shift the center of my attention. Its eyes were larger than typical human eyes, absurdly so. They weren't balloon-sized, yet close enough to make me shudder. I felt overwhelmed by an inexplicable instinct to flee. They churned with a dark hue. I managed to blink, and the expression of misery that flickered across its visage made a bleak visage contrast all the darker. It dropped further, tightening my core. I struggled to connect dots as I felt fear contorting in a clamoring crescendo. I felt both pain and fury wrapping around me, and I wanted to evaporate. The instant my mind realized the fully enveloping moment, it befuddled my ability to shake loose. The meows had ceased, leaving a stifling silence that only increased its unsettling nature. I wanted to retreat further back but found myself paralyzed out of dread. My limbs felt like lead against this unknown terror, and in this moment, everything churned in a visceral intensity as the beast shifted toward me, its movement eerily slow and deliberate. I expected to cower, scream, do something, anything. Yet nothing came. It drew closer, crawling toward me, submerged halfway in the shadows yet ever so clearly visible. But as I thought I had expired, there it was, a face from the dark recesses inside my mind. "Get off of me!" I shrieked. Out of a primal survival instinct, I lifted my hands even before my own conscious resolve could assert itself. All at once, I snapped upright, gasping and blinking at Whale, who was now laying harmlessly on my bed. With escalating confusion, I pondered if I would ever experience this torment again. If you've persevered this far, then you're adequately updated. Many questions remain. What exactly was that entity? Why was I chosen? Was it truly speaking truthfully when it implored me not to look away? And what took place to Whale during that time? Several years have passed since Sarah and I first moved to our own apartment, just the 2 of us and Whale. We maintained our peace and made no plans for any additional pets since Whale had more than enough love to offer the both of us. After all that had transpired, he exceeded those 6 years, and nothing else supernatural ever occurred. He lived a wonderful life. This morning, Sarah and I made the tough decision to put him to rest. With age and various health complications, he became the old man he had grown into. It was one of the saddest moments I've ever faced. Even funerals seemed to pale in comparison. He purred gently throughout as the vet gave him the injection. He paid no regard, and just continued to purr until his small engine finally fell silent. It has been a heavy day for both Sarah and me. We have been reminiscing about our little chunk of affection and reflecting on countless photographs of him. I share all of this because just moments ago, I sensed my cat jump onto my bed.